sense of irony around when you turn the clock back to 2015 and you had Europe's leaders screaming about a migrant crisis because of the 1.4 million refugees that were fleeing Syria, when you consider those exactly the same countries and the same political leaders have absorbed 2 million Ukrainians within the space of within days. Within days they managed to absorb something like 2 million Ukrainians. And of course when you see Priti Patel talking about, and the various Tory politicians and the armchair commentators, far right and right wing commentators talking about, this legal process and they're not coming into this country legally. Of course there's no rubber dinghies for the Ukrainians, and I'm not denying the fact that the Ukrainians shouldn't be allowed in and shouldn't be settled within Europe. The fact is that the Ukrainians were offered free tickets on the Eurostar. There was uproar within this country as people cried out why they were not being allowed in. And the question I've asked over a number of days, as many of us have asked, and I asked, I think the last time I asked was a few days ago in an interview with that person, Julia Hartley-Brewer, I think it was, and I asked the question, what's the difference? What is the difference between the Ukrainians? What's the difference between the Ukrainians and the Syrians and the Sudanese and the Somalians and the Afghanis and the Ukraine? What is the difference between them? And these presenters and these politicians can never really come up with a sensible, reasonable answer to it. And the fact is that Europe never had a migrant crisis, it had a racism crisis. That's what it comes down to. It's the colour of the skin of these migrants that makes a difference. Especially when you see the Daily Mail screaming out for, demanding for the Ukrainians to be allowed in this country, and thinking, well, hang on a second, only, probably a few days before that, weeks and months and years before, apparently we had no space within this country. And I think if you really want to root out racism, which is why organisations such as Stand Up to Racism and many others are important, is because if you want to root out racism, then you dismantle the brutal regime of border fences and detention centres and deportations. I mean, at the end of the day, there was a whole number, I think it was at least 2-3 years ago, that we were told that Glasgow Detention Centre would shut. And there was a huge celebration. Well, we're still waiting for it to be shut. The fact is, people are still being detained there, being incarcerated. You would deal with the killer cops who act with immunity, and I have no truck with the fact that politicians, I'll put it on record on Twitter, that not a single MSP from the Scottish Parliament, 129 MSPs, from the SNP, who ordered the public inquiry, from the Labour Party, from the Greens, from the Liberal Democrats, and even from the Tory Party, have actually attended the Sheku Bayoh public inquiry. Not one. Not one. And if you want to talk about racism, then talk about the racists who are allowed to strip search our black school children, deal with our own politicians who are knee deep in the blood of thousands that have been drowned by Europe's border controls, while Johnson actually wines and dines Saudi crown princes for more arms sales. And I think that we do need to harness, I was speaking yesterday online in the meeting that was taking place in London with people who were involved with Peckham. And also with some of the activists involved, and I think we need to harness that spirit that we saw in Kenmure Street, those moments when the community did come together and said that these are our neighbours, let them go. And I can't forget that day, and I constantly say it ranks in my top 2 political moments of my life, because I remember that day was Mohammed Asif, who's been my friend for some 22 years from when he first arrived in Sight Hill. And he kept phoning, kept texting, because one thing to say about Asif is he's persistent. And I was sitting having lunch with my children, and kept phoning, and then I checked the phone and thought, first of all, it was like, it's an immigration detention van, sort of backup police, and then the more texts started coming. I checked social media, and then when somebody said to me, the police, there's riot vans, I said, can you just film? One of the local councils said, can you just go around and just film all the riot vans? And I think I counted something like 42. And then I thought, right, I said to my ex, I said, I'm going to take it. I said, what are you going to do with the kids? I said, I'll take them to Port Shields for a walk. And then I proceeded to take my 3 kids, still dressed in my suit from work, and arrived and thought, I had my mask on and thought, nobody will really see. I think Asif went, Asif shouted at the microphone, Aamer Anwar's here. And so I thought that was a cover blown. And I remember hearing the chants and looking through the crowd, and it was young and old, black and white, gay and straight, Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, Jewish. And I then went and spoke to the police, because I knew that the First Minister and the Justice Minister had been trying to make frantic contact with Priti Patel's Home Office. They weren't answering the phone. And I went into the police, and it's probably the first time, and hopefully the last time, I'll say to the police officers, the senior police officer was the area commander on the ground, and then I said to one of the constable stands, can you keep an eye on these 3 children? And they said to me, 3 kids, if you move, they'll arrest you. So our kids just stood outside this police van until we went into the van, and they said to me, thank you very much for coming, I said, well, you've got two options. And I said, well, what's the alternative, Mr. Anwar? I said, option A is release the men into my custody with a guarantee that the police will not arrest them, that immigration enforcement unit will not be involved for at least 24 hours to give them a chance to decide what they want to do themselves based on their custody. And I said, this is Paul Shields, this is our community, and people will disperse. You don't have to worry about public disorder. The only public disorder that's going to happen is because of police officers being here. And of course, the police officer said to me, well, that's not possible, we're in dialogue with the Home Office, it's very difficult, we can't really seem to be separate. And I said, well, they said, what's your second option? I said, option B, I said, I've counted 42 riot vans, you've probably got in the region of 200 police officers, use them, use the horses, use the batons, use the riot shoes, and attack the community, go in hard, young and old, whatever it is, to protect and fight on behalf of Priti Patel's Home Office. I said, you're pleased with that. I said, you will be picking up the pieces in this community for the next 20 years. That's the option you have. And of course, the police officer said, the officers that were in that van said, well, that's also not viable. And I said to him, I said, only a week earlier you had football fans marching for the city in George Square, causing mayhem, and we were told that the police couldn't intervene with the Rangers fans because there was a threat of serious public disorder. I said, what's this? I said, well, because these people are peaceful, because they're not drunk, because they're not chanting racist slogans, so it's an easy target, so you think you can bring in the police. I said, all the houses, everybody will empty out the streets. I said, it's Eid. It's on the day of Eid. This is a cynically motivated attack on the community that's happening on the day of Eid. I said, by 4 or 5 o'clock, there will be thousands here. I said, all of us were announcing, and they said they'll come back to me within half an hour to an hour or so. I then went back out to megaphones and said, get on your phones, get everybody to turn up. And thankfully, the police then came back an hour later and said, can we speak to you? And like, first of all, I thought, shit. There's no way they're going to release these two men, and what's going to happen next? And they said, we've got an agreement, and the 2 men will be released. And they said, into my custody. They said, well, will they be arrested afterwards? Will they be tailed? Will they be checked? But no, absolutely nothing will happen to them. Give you that guarantee. And I remember going into the van, and the huge cheer that went up from people when we said that they're being freed, and opening the van, passing by the side, opening the van, speaking to the men in Punjabi, and said that you're free because of these people. You're free because of the people of Paul Shields, because of the power of the people, and that huge cheer, which every time I watch the footage brings tears to my eyes. I had tears in my eyes that day, and I think that spirit exists. That spirit exists in every city, in every country, to fight for freedom. And when you consider the European Convention on Human Rights, it protects governments. It's there to stop, to protect people from governments like ours. And when you consider what happened with Rwanda, there was 132, then there was 35, then there was 8, then there was 7, then there was 5, then there was 2, and then there was 1. And each of these individuals who was on that plane, has a life story, a horrific story of upheaval, of war, of persecution, of personal tragedy, and they're actually no different to the Ukrainian asylum seekers. From a teenager whose relatives have been killed, to the mother whose city's been bombed, or the journalist who's received death threats, no different at all. And this government has blatantly disregarded the UN Convention, and it's doing more. I saw an article that was written the other day by Aamer Anwar, an SNP, who said it's akin to bringing back slavery. I think for all extent and purposes, that is exactly what Priti Patel has done. Because it's not just a case of deporting asylum seekers, they're actually selling them to Rwanda, sending them to Rwanda by plane forcibly, and Rwanda's getting money for it. And we know the reality, and that when it comes down to the channel crossings, that people are continuing to cross in greater numbers. I think there was something like 414 a few days ago that they said had come across. And I suspect that the UK government will step up the pressure. They will step up the pressure to bring in a British Bill of Rights, giving the UK Supreme Court primacy over human rights cases rather than European judges. They were doing everything possible to get this fight on the table, and I think it'll come down to the fact that it was a combination, and I think that's what we need. People are asking, well, how can we stop the next flights when they come? And it has to be a combination. It has to be a combination of people power. It's what I said after Kenmure Street. I said, it wasn't the case of that the First Minister picked up the phone. It wasn't the case that Hamza used to pick the phone. The fact was that the police realised they couldn't get away with it. They had the choice to make. And that's always been the case when it's come to huge movements. It's always been the case when it's come to trade union movements. When there's more of us, there's less of them, they melt away.
And that will be the same this time. It will have to take a combination of people power that saw the removals in Kenmure Street, the removals in Nicholson Square in Edinburgh, and in Peckham successfully blocked, alongside the efforts of human rights lawyers, if we haven't been bumped off by this government. And I want to, Pina touched on the refugee numbers, and I think that we need to be armed with the facts. We should keep returning to the basis. We have the lowest number of refugees in the top 20 hosting countries in the world, with only 173,000 refugees. Germany hosts around 2 million. Turkey hosts 3.8 million, with the poorer countries such as Pakistan, Sudan with over 1 million each, whilst Ethiopia has double what we have in terms of, sorry, my maths is not great, 4 times I think the amount, in terms of 782,000. And you should ask, when anybody talks to you, which human right would you take away? You know, which one would they consider a step too far? Is it the right to life? Is it the prohibition of torture? Is it the prohibition of slavery, the right to liberty, equality, the right to a fair trial, freedom of thought, conscience and religion, and the right to freedom of assembly? Because are they really thinking that we can trust this government with our laws, when this is a government that couldn't even stop itself partying at number 10 while our loved ones are dying, yet they're expected to be trusted with our human rights? And it's incidental. The Bill of Rights has removed the word human. They don't say Bill of Human Rights in the UK, it's actually Bill of Rights, because they want to protect themselves and allow themselves. And we shouldn't forget, I mean, I'm no truck with the idea of talking about Winston Churchill, but the European Convention of Human Rights was written in the aftermath of the Holocaust. And I want to finish off by saying that I also have a message to you from the family of Sheku Bayoh. That he was a 31-year-old father of 2. He died in police custody on the streets of Kirkcaldy on the 3rd of May 2015. He was unarmed, he was CS sprayed, he was battered, he was brought to the ground in less than 32 seconds. Up to 6 police officers restrained him, they shackled him, they handcuffed him, they ankle cuffed him, he was unable to breathe, and he lost his life. And what I've said to people over the last, because week 7 starts tomorrow for the Sheku Bayoh inquiry, and I said, if you march for Black Lives Matter, if you march for George Floyd, then Sheku's family have been asking for the last 7 weeks for solidarity. Black Lives Matter isn't just a hashtag for one day, not just a poster in your window for one day. It's 7 years, over 7 years now, after Sheku Bayoh met his death in the police. And when the public inquiry began, it was clear to the family, well before that the police, the investigators of the PUC, at the Crown Office, had operated an unholy trinity of dishonesty, of racism and incompetence, and they betrayed the word justice. And Carrie Johnson, Sheku's sister, has no doubt that the way Sheku or her family had been treated by the justice system would not have happened had Sheku been white. And Carrie has described Sheku to the irritation of the Scottish Police Federation as Scotland's George Floyd, but taking the knee, Black Lives Matter will mean nothing if Scotland fails to support justice for Sheku. We are in for the long haul. This inquiry is likely to last up to 2 years, and unlike George Floyd, it wasn't one police officer that was restraining Sheku, but at least 7 officers, and unlike George Floyd's case, no police officer has ever faced a trial for Sheku's death in custody. And when the police, as I said, when the police arrived, despite the stories that have been told, and incidentally, I mean, there's huge question marks over the death that took place in the Park Inn. Huge question marks, because why is it 2 times 2 black men with knives are dead at the hands of the police, dying in police custody? Huge question marks over what happened in Park Inn. I don't think we can just conveniently accept that man who's lost his mind, who screams for help or not heard, who lashes out, and then the armed response unit turn up instantaneously within a minute, and he's dead. And I think we need in a democracy to be able to ask questions, not question of shoot to kill. He's armed with a knife, and real questions need to be asked for that. But also in the case of Sheku, the misinformation was spread almost immediately after his death. The story that was leaked to the press, which the police to date say it wasn't them or they don't know, but it was police sources, and they can't tell which police officer, saying that a policewoman had been killed, that a policewoman had been stabbed, a policeman had been killed in Park Inn, and in the case of Sheku's case, it was a case of a policewoman had been stabbed. Policewoman was never stabbed, no knife was ever found in Sheku Bayoh, yet he was the one who was met with CS spray, pepper spray, batons, and he was walking open palm, which anywhere in the world, somebody walking open palm to use a sign of peace. He was wearing a t-shirt. It was 7:30 in the morning, but he was on the ground in less than 32 seconds. And Carrie said, as when they put her brother's body, lifeless body in the ambulance, the word she said was he was still shackled like a slave, with over 24 separate injuries, cuts, lacerations, bruises, and a broken rib. And within minutes, the process of criminalising him, smearing him, stereotyping him, to enforce an image which we heard at the first start of the inquiry of a mad and dangerous black man wielding a knife with extraordinary strength in an attempt to blame Sheku for his own death, but he never deserved to die. And the first question I asked when 24 hours after his death the family came and saw me was, the imagery that started coming out from the police was the words that we used during the course of the crime. He was the biggest male I had ever seen. The biggest male. The first question I asked when I saw the reports was, I asked the family, how tall was Sheku? Sheku was 5'10". How heavy was Sheku? Sheku was 12 stone and 10 pounds, the same weight as I am. And that's 80 kilograms. The officers involved in restraining him on the ground weighed around a total of 100 stones. Over 636 kilograms bearing down Sheku's body. Not a single officer prosecuted, nor as police Scotland ever faced charges. And as for the 9 officers, retired PC Alan Payton on a full pension, who gives evidence tomorrow, retired PC Nicole Short, who gave evidence a few weeks ago, PCs Ashley Thomason, Craig Walker, Daniel Gibson, Kaylee Good, Sergeant Scott Maxwell, James McDonough, Alan Smith. We never saw most of their faces until the start of this inquiry. And Sheku Bayoh's family have waited a very long time to hear the truth, and I think that's the very least they are entitled to. And we are always told that in this country justice is colourblind. Although Sheku was unarmed, his family believe his skin colour was treated as a weapon when he was met with overwhelming force. And in the end, the real test of this inquiry will not be the sympathy expressed for the family or the words saying they've conducted themselves with utmost dignity as they've sat within metres of the officers who they hold responsible for what happened to Sheku. And I think it's a question of whether this country acts to ensure real change takes place in an unaccountable, all-powerful justice system. And the final words I want to say are the words of Sheku's mother, Aamer Anwar, who you'll have seen if you've watched the inquiry, sitting there every single day, silently, who said to me on Friday, as her son's shoes were taken out to be shown to the forensic scientists, I said, that was my son's shoes. That was my son's shoes. That's the ones he was walking down the street in. And she's seen them being paraded in the inquiry. And the word she said, she wants people to think of her only son, not as a man who died following a struggle with the police. She wants people to remember him as a bright young man, who any parent would have been proud of. And sadly, she says Sheku is not by any means the first black man to die in police custody, but if anything, she hopes his name does not fade from memory, and that one day the name of Sheku Bayoh leaves us a legacy that his 2 children can be proud of. So, final word, Kenmure Street, he gave us hope. Paul Shields gave the whole country hope. In fact, he gave people around the world hope. And I hope that one day our children will have a future where their lives lived, whether by Stephen Lawrence, Imran Khan, Chris Donald, Simon Sand, Ahmed Sheikh, Sheku Bayoh, First Attack, and all the island counties will be commemorated for the lives that they lived rather than they lost. I would urge you, this week obviously the final week will be off, probably until November, but this inquiry goes on for 2 years. It's a public inquiry. It makes a real difference when all those seats are packed out and the police officers and the individuals are seeing people watching them. Not just watching from the comfort of their home and online. Come along, go on the inquiry website, get tickets. If you need tickets, contact us and we'll try and get you tickets. So thank you for listening.